Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Check out Poketown Store for all your PTCGO code needs. You can even use the OmniPoke code for an extra 5% discount on your orders. Moving on to today's video though, we're going to be looking at my Worlds and DC Open sort of tournament report. It's going to be a minor report because I didn't do great in either of them, spoiler. But it's really going to talk about more so my mentality leading up to the tournament and what sort of led me to the decisions that I did make, even though they weren't the best, I guess you could say, in hindsight. And more so, importantly, I think for me, is now sort of having a Worlds checklist to stick to for the future, because it's been my fourth Worlds year now. I've got a lot of experience, even though, you know, I've made one winning in and ended up losing in day one. So I've not done amazingly at Worlds, but I've played a plethora of decks at this point. I've played like the Bediff, I've played like a wacky rogue that no one's seen before. I've played all sorts of different things at Worlds so far. I've sort of played twists on popular decks as well. So I think I've got my lay of the land of what needs to happen if you're going to succeed in day one of Worlds as well. Learning through my own failures, I guess, is the way to go. So hopefully, as it comes to London next year, I'll be more prepared and won't fall into the same traps that I did this time around. So you're seeing a Malamar deck on screen, and yes, I will hang my head in shame because I played Malamar in day one of Worlds. I kind of told myself I wouldn't do this for like the longest time, but Malamar was never really a deck that I straight up put down and said was awful. I think the biggest thing that made me keep coming back to it was that it just didn't have any auto losses, and I feel comfortable with decks that don't have auto losses. I've fallen into this trap before with Espeon Garb a couple years ago at Worlds, and it seems to be one of the things that I've just sort of tended to as a player. I like just not having, you know, a 90-10 matchup here that you can take or whatever. And Malamar, the best, like kind of the main selling point of it is just because you have Giratina spell tag, you beat random stuff. You just beat these random decks because you're nice non-GX that can uptrade on people thanks to an Espeon Deoxys sweep or spell tag doing extra damage on bench stuff. So I liked the core of Giratina just spamming itself, helping you beat random stuff, as well as having a Teenachomp and a Mimikyu in here to really help out against Reshizard. And obviously Teenachomp is good at just clearing any tag team off the board if you've got some setup damage. And Espeon Deoxys was thrown in for Mirror. I previously had in a Marshchamp in here for Pikarom, to help alongside the Giratina Garchomp, but I thought overall it was a little bit overkill, and I needed to have something in here for Mirror. So Espeon Deoxys was what I ended up on. I kept custom catches in the build. I found them really useful whenever I was testing Teenachomp Mally, because it can help you just close out games pretty easily. Helps you get around spell tag and Mirror, which is actually a big thing, because even if you're only playing 3 spell tag, you can come against lists which play 4 spell tags, or if they're playing Ultra or something, they can sometimes try and like checkmate you with spell tags. So getting around those in crucial turns is nice. It also means that you can dictate your Espeon Deoxys, but your opponent can't do it against you because you have custom catchers, and they have to take a risk and hope that you can't find Gust if they are going to put down an Espeon Deoxys and power up for 3 energy. Whereas, as long as I've seen a good amount of my opponent's deck, basically as soon as you see Acrobikes, you know that they're not playing custom catchers. You know that you're pretty much entirely free to put down your Espeon Deoxys at any time in Mirror. So that was like the main reason why I liked Malamar. It didn't just straight up lose to anything. And it had answers to like the big 3 with Teenachomp and Mimikyu. I felt Greenzard was pretty favorable, one of my most favorable matchups, I would say, on paper. Pikarom was always relatively close with Mew in the deck, and of course Teenachomp again coming in clutch, and Espeon Deoxys helping out Mirror. I think my Mirror could have been stronger. There are certainly more Mirror tech builds out there, but I felt I had a reasonable chance, thanks to Custom Catcher helping me dictate the pace of play a little bit better, and make the most out of spell tag damage and making sure none of it was ever wasted, which is something that some people can try and do. If you're putting some of your spell tag damage on certain attackers, they can then come in and attack with that guy and make you go through it instead. So with customs, you get around all that fancy shenanigans that they can do and essentially make the most of your damage output, which is kind of what the deck is trying to do. A couple obvious headaches of Malamar. Its consistency is always somewhat of a concern, and that was something that I didn't really take enough into account, I would say, for Worlds. Yes, it can brick, but from my experience, it felt like 2 out of 3 games you'd set up most of the time pretty well. You have things like Mimikyu, which again is just a nice 2-energy attacker at the very least if you're up against aggressive decks. If you come up against like a full blitz on turn 2, if you've gone second or something, you can still just get one Malamar out, get Copycat and hit them for 150 and feel okay that you can sort of like recover in that game. So I feel like this deck can play from behind relatively okay. One other consideration was how like slow this deck actually is. That's one thing that I will not be doing again at Worlds. This deck takes maybe like 10 to 15 minutes for its opening like 2 or 3 turns just to get itself set up, and because you're using non-GXs, you make the game go like 9 turns, and that means that your opponent's Stellar Wishing, you're Stellar Wishing, you're using Viridian, they're using Viridian, and that's just like stuff that's in play, let alone like doing all the other actions that go on, all the supporters and whatnot. So this deck shuffles the deck a lot, it does a lot of actions throughout a game, and that eats away your time. At the same time, you're not just a big 3-prizer slogging away prizes, you're using Giratina, getting cheeky with Distortion Doors and spell tags. All of that is thinking time, all of that is physical playing time, and that makes it difficult for you to finish best of 3 series, to be honest. You really do need to play quickly, and when that's the case, it means that, you know, when I was saying like 2 out of 3 times you would normally get set up, that's a much bigger problem when you can only really finish 2 games. So really, you need to get lucky twice in a row every round. Like, have your 3rd game brick never occur because you've 2-0'd people. So the consistency element was definitely an issue with this deck because it's combined with inconsistency and being slow. If it was inconsistent and fast, there'd be more of a reason to play the deck. Maybe something like Blacephalon with 4 Welder or something. You could get away with that because you high roll very high and win quickly, but your supporter, like your powerful supporter count is low. Powerful in terms of draw, obviously Welder's powerful. It means that if you do like run into one of those hands without energy and you're just looking at Welders and you end up losing, you lose in like 2 turns and it's fine, you can go on to the next games and try and high roll again. Whereas this one can't really do that. So it really does feel like Malamar seems like, I mean, as we all know from the day 1 stats, its conversion rate was pretty poor. It didn't do all that well in any age division, really. So I think Malamar was definitely one of the more overhyped decks going into this tournament. I will say, though, a lot of people were teching for Malamar at the same time. It was very hyped going into the tournament. So there were scoop-ups in tag team decks. There were Hoopers roaming around. There was Lysander Labs and more than just Pikarom. There was Absols thrown into decks. There was all sorts of different techs around for Malamar, so it was clearly one that was on people's radar. So it might be one of these things where Mali easily slips into like tier 2, maybe even 2.5 after the World's results, but could start creeping back into play. Because, you know, Mewtwo did pretty well at Worlds, as we all know, and at the same time, people may be diverting their techs towards the decks that did way better, like putting Tapu Fini into their lists rather than the Hooper into their lists, stuff like that, you know, just based on what's done well at Worlds, and Malamar not being among them means that people will probably dedicate their tech slots elsewhere. I'm going on all sorts of tangents here, I've not even talked about my games so far, but essentially, Malamar wasn't really my top pick going into Worlds at any point. It was always one of these ones that I was not writing off, but always was kind of testing against, more so than anything else, because I knew it would be at least popular day 1. I figured I'd probably face like 1 or 2 day 1 within those 8 rounds. So I would at least have it built at all times to test against for other people. I tested all sorts of builds. I tested it obviously without custom catches as well, with heavy acrobike, tested it with ultra instead of fighting energies, tested it with all sorts of different tech cards as well. Pure psychic for a long time was one of my favorite builds because it bricked the least, but didn't have the stopping power it needed against Reshizard in my experience without having 2 Mimikyu, which kind of got ugly, especially because you couldn't guarantee that they had to flare strike into you if you were just going to shadow impact throughout the mid game. So yeah, all the Malamar decks were kind of experimental. We saw a good mix of Malamar, like make it into day 2, and then a good mix of the builds being played in day 2 as well. So it still kind of juries out on which is actually the best Malamar build, because they all did so mediocre. But this was the one that I kind of settled on. Like I said, having the options for pretty much everything, giving myself a chance to get into every game, which was something that I kind of like doing, but the risk is that Malamar doesn't get into the game every time, so that was kind of the thing that was a risk. You'll notice for some strange counts, I played 3 Giratinas. I never really liked dedicating Ball Search into Giratina, and you love having him pitched with Viridian and Treasure, so I wanted to have a third count. That was like my last 61st... It was like my last hour change, you know, when we were making that reg on the Thursday night. I had one Judge, one Erica in here for a long time. I decided that I was reasonable enough against Reshizard to not need the Judge. That was mainly why he was in here, to try and judge them out of like their healing turns and stuff like that. And I just wanted to have an extra Giratina because there was a bunch of games where I would only have 1 or 2 Ball Search cards. I'd have to commit a treasure to finding a Giratina on turn 1, which meant I could only get 1 Inkay down, and then it would just hurt me like in the late game. Or like the mid game whenever I was testing those games. So having the extra Giratina just gave me more access to see him early. So I kind of liked that addition to the deck. The only thing that I really missed out on this deck was only playing 2 Switch. That was a greedy cut of mine. And I think in hindsight, this 2 counts probably lost me like 2 games throughout day 1 of Worlds. So I would definitely, if I was ever to play, like, I'm super off Mali at the moment. I'm probably not going to touch it for a while. But if I was going to play this deck again, I'd probably just make that switch there. I'd probably go down to 1 fighting energy. You do run the risk of not being able to Calamitous Slash, but usually that's your late game finisher. So you've probably taken like 3 prizes by the time that's the case, and then you're, you know, like 5%ing prizing the energy. Or 5%ing prizing this as well, so maybe it's a little bit risky, but that's probably what I would go for, especially when you don't play Acrobike. You don't discard anything you don't want to with this deck, so you can get away with having 1 energy, because yeah, 3 switch would have been really good. It would have won me definitely game 1 against Ultra Malamar, which was like a 40-minute game 1. It would have won me a Pikarom because I Stellar Wished into a deck of 7 cards, and my last switch was in the bottom 2 cards to make me lose a game as well. So definitely a third switch could have been pretty important on the day. I've also like prized 2 and started a Giratina, and that made me just have a slow start of like attaching a spell tag and abandoning my first prize and just building up on the bench and waiting for my opponent to build up a board. So yeah, 2 switch was a horrible choice on the day, basically. So that would be the only like error, I think, from my list. Everything else I was pretty content with. You know, it's basic Malamar, really. There's not too much going on that's wacky. But overall, quick rundown of my tournament. I only played 5 rounds. I dropped by round 5, but round 1 I had a no-show. I was feeling really good about that as well. I was like, man, this is going to be my year if I'm getting a no-show straight away. Easy W, a nice way to get into the day. Round 2, I tied a Pikarom. That's the game where I had the 7-card deck and missed Stellar Wish to lose a game. He wasn't even necessarily teched. He didn't play Scoop Ups. He didn't play any Hoopers that I saw or anything like that. I think Double Zapdos was the only thing you consider like somewhat techy, I guess. So he was grinching my Stellar Wishes early. So it was unfortunate to tie that. I felt like the game I lost, I was in really favorable spot to win, way more so than the game that I actually won. But hey ho, that's one of those things. I felt like I was in complete control, almost, you know, very close to guaranteed game. Missed the switch, suddenly I'm stuck, and whatnot. It just meant that his lab stuck, and I miss a ton of attacking and all that good stuff. And he's able to get ahead. He's like able to, the turn I like miss attacking, he's then able to like capitalize on that by double customing the Mew and then taking 2 prizes to end the game. So like that would have been completely avoided if I had just got my attack off and won that turn, obviously. But even if I was able to just move a guy and hit him for 130 or whatever, everything was super avoidable there. In round 3, I tied a Mirror. It was a pure Psychic Mali, I want to say. I didn't see Ultra Necrozma, at least. In Psychic... Well, in Mali Mirrors in general, they're like the most fun games you can have. That's like the big... One other selling point I had was... Well, less than the selling point of Malamar, but more of a reason why I went away from Pikarom and Reshizard, was that you basically have no control of the mirror if you're playing Pikarom and Reshizard. It really feels like going first is a huge deal, and then it's who runs hotter. Like, it feels like if you don't full blitz on turn 2, you probably lose, and Pikarom was like my number 1 deck going into the tournament. I ended up having like 9 mirror matches in a combination of like on the plane, and then on the first day I was in DC, and it really put me off because I was like, there's nothing I can do really for mirror to make it favorable for me. And that's just horrible. I really don't want to do that. If Pikarom, I expected at least to be the most popular deck, it feels like you just have to roll higher than them in a mirror, which is just something I didn't really have control of. Whereas Malamar, at least you could control the mirror somewhat, and there was some skill there involved. And that's what led to these Malamar mirrors being like the most fun games you can have. You start learning their list as you go. You learn if they play customs. You learn if they're Psychic Malamar. You find out how many spell tags they have. You find out if they play Erica or Judge or Reset Stamp or any of those cards as well. So Malamar's really fun to play because both players are trying to conceal their information whilst also setting up their win condition at the same time, be it Espeon Deoxys or Ultra Necrozma or any other tech cards they have. So the Mali mirrors are actually super fun. We had a really close tie in round 3. I think I won the first game, being able to get Espeon Deoxys with 6 energy on because I realised that he didn't play Gust and win that game. And then in game 2, he had to put down his Espeon Deoxys. Like I believe I went like 2 prizes up. Then he was able to stamp me, and he put his Espeon Deoxys down on the turn he stamped. He only had like 2 Malamars in play though, so he like double recharged to the Espeon Deoxys and just sort of like left it there and hoped that I couldn't find customs. And I went like 4 turns without finding a supporter. I even like Stellar Wish twice, missing supporters to like not help me get customs to just close out the game immediately. So that was kind of rough, but it was like a good risk on his part, which then let him do the whole cross division shenanigans for game. So that was a pretty cool tie. There was obviously no time for game 3, Mali, etc. In round 4, I faced a Pikarom. This was a more heavily teched Pikarom, I want to say. It was playing Absol and Labs. So there were situations where I had to like double attach to Jirachi just to like get rid of it, even though I'm not able to like Stellar Wish and stuff. So yeah, that was definitely a little bit awkward, but funnily enough, I ended up coming out with a win with that round. I think that was like the game I had, where I actually drew like really well both games. I 2-0'd him, and I could honestly say like I drew pretty well in that series. It felt like I always had Counter Stadium, always had switching outs around like Absol and stuff. I got enough Malamar set up, and I was able to just close games with Tina Chomp both times. So that was like a very, very clean way to beat Pikarom, which was a big like confidence booster after me basically starting 0-2, finally getting a legitimate win under my belt as a 2-0-2. Then in round 5, I faced Ultra Necrozma. It's against Raz, who I've played a couple times before. He's a really good player, and we ended up basically being in a Mexican standoff where he can't attack into my spell tag, he doesn't play any Gust, and I can't take another prize unless I want to fall into a Sky Scorching Light. And it's basically me passing against him the entire time. The biggest thing is, so he has less cards in deck than me, so I'm just passing, he's also passing. We're just going back and forth passing. But I am out of Cynthias, and he still has potentially 2 available to him. So I think I can, like, he's worried that I could deck him out, but I'm also kind of aware that he could also deck me out if he has all of his Cynthias in his deck. So we get to a point where he gets the 0 cards in deck, plays his first Cynthia, shuffles a bunch and like passes again into me. I keep drawing it until I'm at no cards in deck, and then I Cynthia myself, which is my last Cynthia. I don't know how many Cynthias he has left. Eventually though, he like gets bored of the passing shenanigans. I think he's pretty much worried about like losing the game because I guess it's more of an indication that he doesn't have any more shuffling effects to close out the game. He attacks into my guy with one of his like damage spell tag attackers. It was like with a Malamar rather than something else that was active. I think it was if he attacked with a Giratina, it was the Tina damage plus the spell tag gave me checkmate. But if he attacked with the Malamar, it meant that I didn't checkmate him immediately. So he did that, slowly like KO'd whatever my active was. I think it was like a Mimikyu with a spell tag on it or something like that. And I essentially have the point where I'm at 3 prizes. He's just taken a prize to go down to 3 himself. No, he's just taken... Let me get this right. I'm at 4 prizes, and he's just taken his 3rd, I think. Something like that. It's one way or the other. But regardless, like Sky Scorching Light isn't available, but as soon as it is available, he can take his last 3. So he must have just gone down to 3 by using that Malamar attack. That makes sense. So it's basically, I feel like I have to win that turn. I saw 2 switch in his discard pile. I was trying to play around 3 switch in his discard pile, where I didn't know at the time, but he told me like after that game that I could have just continued to pass into him to win, because he couldn't do like Sky Scorch and he was going to run out of deck cards. But instead I go for a play where I end up Distortion Dooring 2 Jirachis to take 2 prizes, which lets me win the game if I'm able to take my last custom catcher as either my second to last or sorry, as long as custom catcher isn't my last prize, I win basically. So I do the Distortion Door, custom catcher my last prize, he's able to Sky Scorch me. So it's kind of one of these things where I was trying to play around an extra copy of Switch and an extra copy of Cynthia by me not just sitting there and passing into him, and taking a 66% chance to win the game on the spot, and then just getting the rough rub of the green. So it's one of those like questionable, like I would still now think I probably would have made the same play in a tournament every single time, because you have a chance to win on the spot, a pretty good chance to win on the spot as well, and it felt bad to not be playing around 4th Cynthia or 4th Switch. And I was like, he could easily have one of these things, and then I would either deck out or he would, I don't know, maybe there was just other shenanigans that he could come up with. So the biggest problem was I did the Distortion Door on his Jirachis, which gave him board space to Distortion Door me back and then Sky Scorch. The point was I had 2 Malamars that had only 20 damage on them set up, so he kind of relied on Distortion Door to close the game out. Even though he was in Sky Scorch range, my stuff was 10 off. So yeah, he would have gone into Sky Scorch range in terms of prizes. So I think he would have gone down to 3. I was at 3. And then I do the Distortion Door play to kill 2 Jirachis, custom his game. So 66% of the time I just win outright. But I whiff, and that's rough. And then in game 2, I lost because I played a Switch, because I only had 2 Switch, and there was a point where I had to play one to get a draw supporter off Jirachi, and it meant that I had too many energies stuck on a Giratina that he wasn't killing. And it meant that I couldn't like pay retreat, get them all back onto Espeon Deoxys and attack with it all at once. So he won in time basically. If I had like 5 more minutes in the game, he'd be forced to like attack into the Giratina and I would be able to cross division. But because he was a game up, he was able to just pass into me. And because I didn't play Switch, I couldn't just power up Espeon Deoxys in the number of turns I needed, because I had to do the 200 damage Sky Scorch on turn 2 of time, which I wasn't set up for because I had burned my switches. So if I played 3rd Switch, I'm pretty sure I could have at least got a tie out of the Ultra. Then I would have been at 203. Not much better, but I wouldn't have been out of the tournament at least. And I would have to win out, which probably wouldn't have happened with Malamar, but that's nonetheless something to bear in mind. But that round against Raz was really good fun. I feel like I should have won game 1, but kind of took a risk. To just kind of too eager to win rather than, I guess, sort of, I just didn't want to be at the whim of him playing certain tech cards that I could have lost to, or just a 4th count Cynthia, which I was like pretty much expecting, to be honest, because then I would have just decked before him. So it felt like it was a good risk that sort of went bad, and then in game 2, I was again under the clock trying to rush to win, and it meant that I sort of didn't use my resources well enough with the Switch to end up losing. So yeah, that's a rough way to lose, and that meant that I was out of the tournament for day 1, facing basically 2 Picarons and 2 Mirrors, which is kind of as expected. I would have liked to have seen a couple like free rounds like Blounds or Reshizard. They were definitely around, but there are also some scary matchups out there in the field as well. Things like Guardy Sylveon, definitely a matchup that was not on my radar going into the event, and was one that was pretty much feasting on Malamars throughout the entire day, because the amount of healing that they have, and essentially they're like a way harder version of Green Zard, because you can't just use Mimikyu to blow one up at any point in the game. You need to try and use Tina Chomp and stuff, and that can come with its own risks, as you know. And of course, they can get you down to 0 cards as well, which can also be pretty awkward. So, Guardy Sylveon, definitely a difficult matchup for Mali. So I don't feel like too bad about not making day 2 with this deck. I feel like I made mistakes only in that round 5 game, but that's something that I can work on myself. Everything else was just kind of like, yeah, it just feels like Malamar wasn't the play for day one, as we could see by the conversions. So yeah, I'm going to kind of put Mali to rest for a little bit and just play more aggressive decks that we've come to see do pretty well in the tournament. So yeah, that would be the one change I made. That was what I played, but I would definitely play a third switch if I was going to play Mali any longer. But I wouldn't recommend playing Mali to anyone. For the Open, I was pretty annoyed, so I just played Pikarom. I was like, I'm not touching Mali again. Pikarom was the other deck that I brought with me, and because Mali was like super popular day one, I wanted to like hard tech for Mali. So I played 3 Labs, 1 Absol, kind of like really just trying to make life difficult for the opponent if they are going to be any sort of Malamar player. In the first round, I faced Ability Zard. I'm able to take the win there. After getting stomped in like 2 attacks in the first game, I'm able to make the comebacks in the second game and the third game. He actually kind of bricks in the third game as well, something to bear in mind. But Ability Zard is definitely a scary matchup, especially looking at Tord's list that he ended up getting top 4 with. I think that's a matchup that's a little bit ugly for Pikarom. Definitely with the amount of gusting that they have, they can really be proactive against you if they've gone first. That can be pretty yikes. So as long as Ability Zard draws well, that's a bit worrying for Pikarom. It might be something that they have to try and tech against for the future, but we were able to come out with a win on that round. I faced a Mew 3 that was playing the Janine and Shinobi Mastery combo with Venomoth GX. They were fortunately never able to get it off, though. They were having to like weld all the time, so they didn't have the option to use Janine, so we were able to get over that 2-0. I then faced a mirror match and was able to get the good rub of the green. I'm pretty sure I went first game 1, just full blitz first, and went into tandem shock and all that good stuff, and was able to win. So we start off the DC Open 3-0, feeling good about ourselves, shaking my head that I didn't play this day 1 of Worlds. Like, man, I'm doing so much better with this deck. It's running smooth and everything. And then the swarm of bad luck comes all at once as well. I'm up against Whimsicott in round 4. It's my own deck list that I gave to another UK player to play at Worlds, and he ends up stomping me with Whimsicott. It's also partly just because my own deck is bricking that I'm not able to get like set up, because the only real way that Pikarom beats Whimsicott is just pressuring them out early and sort of stifling their setup, and maybe, you know, tag bolting for a Porygon at some point, or customing up the Porygon and knocking that guy out, or knocking out a Dedenne with customs or something along those lines, and force them to draw a bunch of cards. But none of that happened. None of my pressure was happening. I wasn't able to blitz on turn 2, 3, or 4 in game 1. So that was pretty rough. He was able to get the full board going and doing his shenanigans. Whenever I would attack, there was a couple heads in there as well, which wasn't great. And then game 2 was actually a very similar story. I prized Thunder Mountain. I was also forced into a situation where I played Cynthia turn 1 into a hand that had 3 more Cynthias, and then Dedenne, and because I had no energy in play, I felt I had to Dedenne change, and I ran out of Cynthias on the first turn, still missed energy attachment for turn, and then for the rest of the turn, basically for the rest of the game, I was using Volkner to grab me an energy card plus custom catcher so I could draw just 2 cards. It was really embarrassing and rough. So yeah, I got pretty much smacked by my own Whimsicott list, which is a shame. And then I faced 2 mirrors on the bounce where I prized Dawn Wings. And for those of you who don't know, when you don't play Switch in the deck, Dawn Wings is the lifeblood, because otherwise you just get tandem shock trapped and you lose. So I lose 2 mirror matches in a combination of prizing Dawn Wings, even in the game where my opponent was getting unlucky and they had to tingly return. That paralysis stuck, and then off that tingly return, they were then able to like Dedenne change and get a full blitz off the following turn. So if I was able to like just Cherish Ball, well, I had Cherish Ball, but I couldn't find Dawn Wings because it was prized, I would have been able to full blitz first and get my own board going, and my full blitz would have knocked out his Cocoa Prism as well. It would have been so perfect, but yeah, he was prized, then I lose. And that was like in a game 3, and then I have a situation where I prize him, I start him, get donked, and then I prize him again. So Dawn Wings was super trolling me in those 2 rounds of Mirror, and it kind of makes me want to go to a build where you just play Volkner and 2 Switch. The biggest like upside of playing Dawn Wings, I guess, is that you get to play 2 more Cherish Balls, so you have less outs to just dead hands, because you can always find a Dedenne and get rolling. But there definitely is that headache of prizing Dawn Wings. Maybe the correct answer is playing one Dawn Wings, one Switch. So you can get Dawn Wings down and be stamp proof, I guess. That's kind of the biggest other reason why I didn't want to play Switch, is because you can get Dawn Wings down early. So if your opponent just goes for a stamp tandem shock, you don't just lose, because Dawn Wings can get you out. So I don't know, I'm kind of on the fence about Dawn Wings. It really trolled me at the Open. I went 3-3. 6-3 would have been 1 to 8 points, but I was just so tilted that I just wanted to go. And I started doing some Suicune raids with friends instead. So yeah, that was pretty much my Open. It went pretty well to begin with, but I got trolled by some bad RNG. And I don't really like blaming RNG for losing games, but the Dawn Wings stuff is just... It's as simple as that in a mirror situation, that they can tandem shock trap you by a turn whilst taking 3 prizes, and like there's nothing you can do about that, right? So yeah, this Lysander Labs Absol stuff didn't come in handy at all because I didn't face any Malamars. If I was looking to play Pikarom over the next couple of weeks for cups or anything, I think these are the changes that I would make. I've just gone to second Stamp, third to Dene. I cut the Erica for Lily. I was just testing Erica at the Open. I didn't find much use out of it, so I'm just going to go back to Lily. But this is like not very Malamar teched. I'm not expecting Malamar to be hugely popular in Cups because it's done so poorly at Worlds. I think more people will be looking towards, you know, Blacephalon, Mew 3, Ability Zard, those sorts of decks. I think Pikachu, Zekrom can still compete among those. Obviously, Pikarom still got top 8 at Worlds. With a pretty different list that was very Jirachi focused, but I still think like a Turbo Rom can still do reasonably okay, and I think the double stamp should definitely help out against some of those tag team builds, because especially like Ability Zard and Mew 3, they're super Welder focused, and when they only play 4 copies of Welder, you can definitely punish them with stamps. So I think going up to 2 is definitely a big choice that will definitely be helpful for the deck. But yeah, I'll be looking at the top 8 lists tomorrow in our video, and then I'm going to be going on to updating lists from Worlds and updating all these, well, sort of profiling these sort of more wacky rogues as well. I'm really excited to get a look at a bunch of these decks that were played on day 2, made it through day 1, and all that good stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff to come for the channel. We are straight into the new season. We've got regionals on the way in September. I've got Sheffield and Cologne on the way. And of course, Worlds is in London next year, so I'm obviously going to be there and trying hard to make my invite at the very least. And who knows, if I get given the chance to commentate, that would be insane. It's a little bit more likely now. Basically, it's up from a 0% chance because it's not in America anymore. So that's always really cool as well. So yeah, quick sort of rundown of my salty day 1 and day 2 of Worlds. More so, though, a discussion, I hope, on my thoughts going into the tournament and all that good stuff. I think there were some surprises along the way for me. Guardian was probably the biggest surprise for me. It kind of came out of left field. It really wasn't something I tested against much at all for Worlds. And that's kind of indicative of how we had to prepare for this Worlds. It's one of the first times where we didn't have PTCGO as a resource for the majority of the testing time, which is pretty gross. You're pretty much reliant on only your friend group and what they're expecting and all that good stuff. And of course, you know, I have you guys to discuss this sort of stuff with when I'm streaming and whatever, so maybe I get a bit more of a scope, but at the same time, this was a very difficult and different Worlds to prepare for than most. Definitely a lot of change happening, and it's going to be interesting to see how Worlds sets the tone for the next few months and how the meta is going to develop around that. Mew 3 has come in and said that it's the new top dog, and it's going to be interesting to see how the meta shifts around that. So let me know how your Worlds went, guys. Also, thank you to everyone who came and said some kind words to me or asked for a photo or anything. It really was a nice confidence booster. It's a shame I couldn't bring it home for you guys, but there's always next year, and I feel like I have learned a lot from this Worlds, and these are rookie mistakes that I'll be getting out for next time with my actual deck selection. I really think that was one of the main things holding me back this year, that I was kind of at the hands of Malamar. Sometimes they just don't go your way. But yeah, I'm going to be back streaming later tonight, and I'm also going to be recording daily. I've had my week off from DC now, and we're going to be back at full throttle. So hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time for another video. Cheers.